Hey guys, this is Brian Cox. I hadn't done a video in a little while, so I thought that I would take a couple minutes and just share some things with you. Just got finished taking some things to Goodwill and taking some trash to the landfill. I know that sounds super exciting on a Friday. Fridays are typically my day off, although sometimes things come up and that's just part of life. But all the errands and all the appointments that I have, I try to get them all on Fridays, so I can just take that day, and that's kind of my errand day to get things done. But I want to take a couple of minutes and share with you something really powerful that if you're willing to apply this, I think it'll have a radical impact on your whole life. And there's two guys that really have influenced me in the way that I think greatly. And both of these guys just happen to be ex-Navy SEALs. And one is Jocko Willink, and the other is David Goggins. Now, Jocko Willink, he wrote a book entitled Extreme Ownership. And basically the thesis of that book is no matter what's happening in your life, no matter how legitimate the reasons may be that you have for blaming somebody else or something else, at the end of the day, you have to take ownership of your life. You have to be the one to accept the responsibility. If I'm not happy with where I'm at in my life, if I'm not happy in my marriage, if I'm not happy in my job, if I'm not happy with life in general, at the end of the day, I have to take ownership of that. And I can't blame somebody else or something else. No matter how legitimate I may be able to do that, I have to take that ownership. The other guy, David Goggins, now I want to add a disclaimer here. David Goggins uses a lot of profanity. I don't endorse that. I wish he didn't. I think he would probably, I don't think, I know, he would be a better communicator and probably reach more people if he cleaned up his language. And so I don't endorse his language by any means. However, his story is really unique. If you know anything about Navy SEALs, all guys that earn their tridents have to go through what's called BUD/S. It's a pretty lengthy course where they're taught the basics of what it is to be a Navy SEAL. It's considered probably the hardest military training in the world. Has a very high dropout rate. Well, David Goggins not only went through BUD/S once, David Goggins went through BUD/S 3 times because he had a series of injuries that set him back. But his story is really phenomenal, and this guy is just a model of perseverance. And he does all these ultra endurance marathons. He's just an incredible, individual. But David Goggins, he's wrote a couple books if you want to check those out. He does a lot of podcasts. But one thing David Goggins, one of his central principles is what he calls the mirror check. Now, what I'm about to share with you is probably one of the most painful things you will ever do. That's why most people will never improve themselves or improve their circumstances because most people are unwilling to put themselves through the discomfort mentally and emotionally of looking at yourself in the mirror. If you're not happy with who you are, if you're not happy with where you're at in life, David Goggins tells us, he says, you got to look in the mirror and say, okay, how have I contributed to where I'm at today? In other words, what are my hang-ups? What are my flaws? What are my attitudes? What's in me that needs to be changed? Because here's the deal. You can't change anybody else. That's a fantasy. The only person you can change is you. And if you're willing to do this mirror check, if you're willing to look at yourself in the mirror with no pretense, with no sugarcoating, and just say, what are my problems? What are my flaws that have caused me to be in this position that I'm in right now? And how do I need to correct it? And that's why most people will never grow. That's why most people will never mature in their life. They'll never see things change, because they're not willing to go through that painful process of what I call brutal self-examination. And so I went through this about a year ago. I just was going through a really tough time in my life. I was really unhappy with myself in general, okay? And I had to take a hard look at myself in the mirror. And I had to say, what role did Brian Cox play in getting myself to where I'm at? What are the flaws? What are the things in me that I need to change in order to improve as a person, as a husband, as a dad, as a pastor, as a friend? You know, you just go on down the line. What are the things in me? Not what's wrong with this person and this person and this person, but what's going on with me that's got to be changed. And that is an incredibly hard and painful process, and it's still ongoing. Okay, it's not a one-time thing that you do. This is something that you got to do on a consistent, regular basis. Just brutal, honest self-examination. And you see this play out in all walks of life. And I'll just give you a couple quick examples. Because I've been a pastor for 15 years, I've been in tons of churches, and you see these churches all over the country. Okay, they're not unique. They're all over the place. But there's so many of these churches across our country. They'll have 6, 7 pastors over 12, 15, maybe 20 plus years. Now, I want to add a disclaimer here. I'm not saying pastors are without fault, because pastors make mistakes. I make mistakes. Pastors make bad decisions. I've made some bad decisions in my 15 years as being a pastor. Okay, so I want you to be clear on this. I'm not saying that pastors are without fault. I'm not saying that pastors don't ever contribute to problems or issues in churches. Sometimes they do, okay? I get that. I fully understand that. But what I'm saying is there's a lot of churches that they have basically what you call a revolving door of pastors. They'll stay 2 or 3. You might have one stay 4 years or so, but it's a revolving door. And the problem is the folks within the church, they put all the blame on the pastor, but the one constant is no matter who's there, the same issues, the same problems keep coming up. No matter who's leading, it could be a different pastor, it could be a different music leader, it could be a different youth guy, whatever it is. The people change, but the issues remain constant. And so rather than doing that very hard self-examination and saying, why do we keep having these same problems and these same issues come up over and over and over again, no matter who's here, it's just a lot easier to blame the pastor or blame the youth pastor or blame the worship pastor or blame the elders or blame blame everybody else except taking the responsibility. And just apply that to a company. You see that in companies, no matter who's in charge, no matter if the policies and procedures are changed, they still keep having the same problems, the same issues come up. If you own your own business and you keep having the same issues come up, no matter if you change personnel or you change your procedures or whatever the case might be, but the same stuff keeps coming up repeatedly, then at some point you got to look at yourself in the mirror and say, hey, what am I doing to contribute to this? I see it in marriages. People may have 2 or 3 marriages, and the same issues come up in every marriage. And at some point you got to ask yourself, hey, if these things keep coming up, what role am I playing in this? How am I contributing to this? And that's why most people will never grow. They'll never change. They'll never see anything different happen in their life because they're not willing to go through that painful process of brutal self-examination. And so my encouragement to you is this. If you're not happy with an area of your life, or if you're not happy with life in general, be willing to take that courageous step. It takes courage to just be really honest with yourself. And over the past year and a half, I've really come to terms with that there's freedom in just being completely honest with yourself and being completely honest with others as well. Most people don't know how to deal with that. It makes total honesty makes a lot of people really uncomfortable because in our culture we're just so used to sugarcoating things or just flat out lying about stuff because we don't want to rock the boat, we don't want to make somebody mad. We're afraid of what the fallout might be, so we either just sugarcoat it or we just flat out lie about it. But what I've come to understand, and what I hope you'll come to understand, is there's total freedom in being honest with yourself, honest with others. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you need to go around and be a jerk. You don't need to be hurtful to people. That's not God honoring. But I think most people could really benefit from just a healthy dose of self-honesty and just being honest with others in a kind way and just saying, hey, this is how I feel about this. This isn't a personal thing. This isn't an attack on you. This is just how I feel about it. And, I hope that you can take that. You may not agree with it, but this is just my feelings on it. I value our relationship enough to be honest with you about it. And so let me encourage you with that, and let me leave you with a final thought. There's no healing without going through pain. There's no healing without going through pain. We see that in the medical field. If you've got something wrong with you internally, the doctor says, hey, we're going to have do surgery. Surgery is painful, right? But once you recover, you feel much better. And so for mental and emotional and spiritual healing to take place, you've got to do some surgery, and you've got to remove some things. You've got to operate on some areas in your your life that are going to be painful. But if you're willing to take that step, man, I promise you, you'll see some growth. You'll see changes in your life. And so I hope you'll do that. I hope you'll be courageous and do that. And praying for you. Man, I'm rooting for all of you. And I hope you guys have an awesome day.